So here's the question: how to let your gifted child soar? I feel like I'm always chasing to keep up and therefore end up holding them back. Let's talk about mom guilt and the gifted learner. Hi, I am Rachel from 7 in All. I am a second generation homeschooler who loves to make nerdy homeschool videos here on YouTube. If you like nerdy homeschool videos, go ahead and click subscribe so you can follow along for more. And periodically, I like to make videos addressing the experience of homeschooling gifted students specifically. There's a strange phenomenon that occurs in parenting and homeschooling a gifted learner, in which the parent can end up feeling guilty for holding their child back. In reality, the parent isn't really doing any such thing. In reality, the parent is very diligently working on providing their child with a fantastic education. However, it's just not enough for this eager, gifted learner. You might find yourself with a young, eager learner whose appetite to learn is simply not easily satiated. Where another child might be satisfied with an hour of reading aloud and half an hour of bookwork, you might find yourself doing double or triple the amount of time in educating your gifted learner, and it's still not going to feel like enough to them. The reality that your young, gifted student might not quite understand is that we parents probably have a few other responsibilities besides just providing them with a fantastic education. You might have other children that you are responsible for and educations that you are responsible for. You might have meals to make. You might have a house to take care of, errands to run, and the myriad of responsibilities that make up adult life. You probably have more responsibilities than your small child does. And to their immature minds, it might feel like the amount of time that you are expending on scholarly pursuits is miserly. But to you, who can look at life with a broader perspective and with more maturity and experience, you know that you are investing a lot of time into these scholarly pursuits that fuel their little brains, and you can draw appropriate boundaries. So what are some practical things that we can do when our goal is both, number one, to let our gifted kids fly the way that their brains were wired to, and to help them learn to respect the natural constraints on time, energy, and resources that are part of life in the real world. Number one, communicate boundaries clearly and ahead of time. Sometimes we as parents don't really want to communicate limitations to our children. We seem to want to appear limitless for reasons that we should probably discuss further. But limitless is not our reality. We have limits. In a more typical learning scenario, the parent does not usually reach the limit of their ability to devote time, energy, and resources to their child's education before the child runs out of attention and focus. Usually, it's going to be the child's energy for learning that is a limiting factor, their ability. And so we're purposely doing short lessons to deal with their developmental ability to focus and learn within a day. However, with a gifted child who is just motivated and interested and wants to stay learning on a certain topic, they are going to have so much more energy for this topic and for this skill and for challenging their brain than you are going to have. You are going to be a limiting factor. When teaching a gifted learner, this actually might be a near daily occurrence, so it's important to communicate this expectation to your child. One of the key skills our gifted learners need to develop is that of respecting the limitations of others. This is going to be crucially helpful to them when they are tiny, and it is also going to be very necessary for them in adulthood. Throughout their lives, they will be living with, having relationships, and dealing with others whose brains are not wired the way that their brains are. They need to be able to respect the limitations of those that they do life with. So let's start building those skills right now at home with their own family members. Gifted kids don't have the same perspective on time that you might have. You might know that it is reasonable to read 5 or 10 pages from this nonfiction text and then move on with your day, while they would be perfectly happy to sit there while you read to them the full 200-page text. And when you can't make that happen, they feel that it's unreasonable. But this is where we need to communicate clear boundaries and natural limitations. Remember that children do not have the same perspective that adults have. They are immature, they are children. This is natural, and we are there to help them in the maturing process. I'm going to share a story from my own childhood to illustrate this. I was at a picnic with some family friends, and I was about 12 years old, and a family friend, an adult, asked me, "Hey, Rachel, have you been reading much?" And I said, no, I haven't really had any time to read lately. We're too busy. My mom's not giving me any time to read. And my mom snapped back right away. "Rachel, how many books have you read this week?" And I answered immediately, because of course I knew, 7. I'd read 7 books that week, and I was 12, so at this time these were meaty, classic chapter books, and it was very normal for me to average a book a day at this point in my life. Now, I was not lying when I told the person that my mom wasn't giving me any time to read. To my own immature perspective, I had barely any time to read. I mean, 1 book a day, I could have been reading 3 or 4 books a day, and maybe that would have felt like really reading. But to my adult perspective, I can look back and see, hey, if you were reading a meaty book each day, probably you did have time to read. It just didn't feel like enough to you at that stage in your life. This is why we need to be communicating clear boundaries and natural limitations to our young gifted children, because they just might not have that reasonable of a perspective on how much learning and how much food for the brain there ought to be in a single day. So with your gifted child, be clear and communicate boundaries and limitations on the day's learning, especially doing so in advance so that they are not surprised by limits, so that they are not surprised by your need to cook dinner or to cook lunch or to take care of a baby. Number 2, empower and equip. Empowering and equipping your child to pursue their own learning at their own pace is crucial to transforming the homeschool experience for a gifted learner. Your gifted child still needs you to be a part of their education, but work on building those foundational skills that will allow them to continue the learning even when mom is not available to teach them or is not available to drive them to classes. This will allow them to fly in pursuing the knowledge and skills that fuel their brain, even when you don't have the time, energy, or availability to oversee their learning. So give your students the tools that you can give them, and don't make excuses about not being able to give in the best way. A gifted learner can do incredible things if simply given the right tools and the opportunity and time to learn. Maybe you can't teach them piano. Maybe you don't have the capacity or the budget or the time for piano lessons. But can you get them a keyboard and a book so that they can teach themselves? Maybe you can't sit down and teach them how to paint. Maybe you can't get them expensive lessons. But can you get them some paper and brushes and paint and give them a tutorial from the internet or a book? Because your gifted learner is going to amaze you with what they can do when simply being given the tools and the opportunity to teach themselves. The lesson here is that if you feel that you are the factor in holding your gifted child back, try to get yourself out of the way. This is not in the sense that you have nothing left to teach them. You absolutely do, and they are still going to need you to continue being a part of their education and to continue teaching them much. But in academic or skill-based areas where they can fly, try to make sure that your lack of time will not hinder their progress. Purposefully plan for more independent learning and student-led resources versus using teacher-led resources that require more time and more prep from you. Number 3, plan ahead. And I mean way ahead. Be prepared. When you are teaching the kind of child who might just wake up one morning and spontaneously have mastered the next 20 weeks of concepts covered in their current math curriculum, you need to be prepared, and it will pay to already be prepared with more challenging materials that you can give them. With a more typical learner, a homeschool parent might want to work on planning for the next year in advance. With gifted learners, you should be looking at 2 or more levels where they are at now, because odds are they are going to progress through those levels faster than you expect. It is highly normal, especially in the early years, that your gifted learner might gobble up a year's worth of math or science or reading in 2 months, maybe. So when those 2 months are up, you want to have a plan with where you are going next. No, it is not crazy to be looking at 3rd or 4th grade science curriculums when you only have a kindergartner, because odds are you do want to get started buying books off the book list for those programs, because sooner or later you're going to find yourself with a child who has breezed through everything you've already planned, and you want to be ready to start the next thing. So plan ahead. You don't get the luxury of time with a child who learns at a cheetah's pace. Yes, education is not a race, but someone forgot to inform the child of that. And if you try telling them now, they're not going to believe you. When learning brings so much delight, of course it's a race to learn the next new thing. And finally, I want to encourage you to resign yourself to a little bit of that feeling like you're never going to catch up. Your grown-up brain and body simply is probably not going to have the energy of that of a small gifted learner. When learning is what energizes them, and they are constantly learning, they're constantly being energized. Plan for a wide feast of education and a wide feast of skill building in their lives. Incorporate structure into all of your days. Incorporate a wide feast. Don't only focus on going up, although they might want to go up, but go broad in their education so that it's not always about the next level, but we're still getting to learn new things in a wide variety of subjects and skill sets. Educating a gifted learner is a fun and a wild and sometimes exhausting, actually probably mostly exhausting adventure. I always want to be here for you to encourage you in this adventure. Please, if you have any comments or further suggestions on how to stay ahead, staying one step ahead of your gifted learner, please leave them down in the comments below to share with other families. And I'll be seeing you next time. Make sure you're subscribed to 7 and All. Bye!